Hopefully, in our next panel, we'll be able to dig deeper on what meaningful participation and agenda setting from the Global South could look like. I'd like to welcome on stage our plenary panel, Global South Leadership in AI Governance. I'd like to first welcome Mr. Amit Shukla on stage, Joint Secretary from the Ministry of Electronics and, from the Ministry of External Affairs. Ministry of Electronics seems to be on the mind with the AI Summit. He's Joint Secretary for Cyber Diplomacy and one of the chief architects of the outcomes document of the Impact Summit. He is a very senior cyber diplomat within the Indian government. I'd like to call on stage Professor Ravi. If I could please have everyone's attention. I'd like to welcome on stage Professor Ravi, who heads the Department of Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, Sirai Institute at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, and has also been recently appointed to the UN Scientific Panel as part of the Global Dialogue on AI. If Anita can join us on stage, Anita Gurumurthy, who heads and is Executive Director of IT for Change, a leading research organization in this space. If Ambassador Harry can join us on stage, he is Ambassador at Large, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Kingdom of Netherlands, and has also co-chaired the Working Group on Economic Growth and Social Good as part of the AI Impact Summit. Olivier is Director of the AI Scaling Hub at the Rwanda Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and Dr. Seydina is head of ALIVE, a multidisciplinary research group in Senegal. He's also been a member of the high-level advisory board at the United Nations that looked at important questions on artificial intelligence. We're going to be very democratic. Unfortunately, Rafi wasn't able to join us because a bird hit his plane, so it's being rerouted, and he's going to be only landing later in the afternoon. I think he's still on his way. So we'll get started, and he'll sort of join us. Well, I think I just wanted to set a little bit of context before we jump into the Q&A with the panelists. I think we've had various waves of technology. Artificial intelligence is, of course, what's on everyone's tongue these days. There's a lot of conversation around the Global South getting left behind, but there's also a lot of interesting work happening on artificial intelligence in the Global South. So I think we want to talk about what does Global South leadership currently look like, and what can it look like, and how can Global South really set agenda at the table? What are strategies to build local AI ecosystems, reduce dependency on concentrated infrastructure, and really strengthen bargaining power in agenda setting spaces. I'm going to start with Mr. Shukla. As AI governance questions are really increasingly moving into multilateral spaces, and given that is a domain you're deeply engaged in your role at the Ministry of External Affairs, whether it's standard setting or UN processes, to your mind, how can Global South countries move beyond participation to coordinated agenda setting and really drive and meaningfully shape the conversations in this space.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you for the very, I would say, generous introduction, and also very succinctly putting forward the context for many of the issues that we are at hand today in the field of artificial intelligence. Please allow me a little extra minute to, while I use this opportunity to set forward or put forward how we have been looking at the development of this technology. Many technologies, and in fact practically all technologies that are scaled at the level of population scale, I would say, they face various phases in their evolution. There is skepticism, there is risk associated with that, there is fear associated with that, then there is regulation, and then it gets matured, and then at some stage it gets rolled out at population scale. You look at any landmark technology which has changed the course of history, human history, electricity or civil aviation, all of them have gone through many of these phases. When we were looking at the evolution of this technology, very rapid evolution in the last couple of years, what we found was that while it is definitely concentrated in certain pockets of the world, the developmental, I would say, aspects of it and how it is being defined and how the protocols are being defined and those kind of things, it is definitely going to impact the entire humanity. And therefore it is important for all of us to be involved. Now with that thought in mind, with that background in mind, we tried to find what could be our role and what we could be doing and we should be doing. This leads us to our own experience, last, I would say, around 1.5 decades of it, or 2 decades of it, in dealing with digital technologies. And while we may not be the innovators of many of the technologies, we definitely feel that we are one of the very good applicators of the technology. We have used the technology, its application for the digital revolution in India, which all of you today can see. While we still have lots of challenges, developmental challenges that India is facing, the application and implementation of the India stack solutions like the payment system or the Aadhaar identity system, they are remarkable. We ourselves feel that they are really very good. They are very good in multiple dimensions. They are very good in their simplicity. They are very good in several aspects of preserving the data. They are very good in terms of the scale they cover. The population of around we have around 1.4 billion Aadhaar identity numbers. In terms of the number of transactions, the UPI transaction, the digital transactions, we are number 1 in the world. So what we found that while we may not be the original innovators for many of the things, we definitely are one of the solution, I would say, acceptors or application spreaders or users of the application. And the other part of it is that we have used these technologies in our own way to solve our own problems. Now this, because of our size, because of our geographical variations, because of our linguistic variations, because of so many variations within our own society, this becomes an immutable model for many of our friends from, particularly from Global South and of course from Global North also. And that brings me to your question of what should be the role and what could be done by the countries of Global South. My understanding is that when we were designing this AI Impact Summit, we very deliberately and cautiously chose these 7 themes. If you look at those 7 themes, 6 of them are directly linked to developmental aspects. And the 7th one, which is safe and trusted, is fundamental to all the 6 of them. So basically, our approach to the summit has been that we are going to use this technology for developmental aspects, as we have been doing. As any technology for us, a nation like India, which is having lots of developmental challenges, for us technology is a solution provider. We will use it, we have been using it, we will be using it for solving our own problems, probably in our own way, And that's why there is a very, I would say, buzzing startup ecosystem in India. They are coming up with very, very innovative solutions using this technology and other technologies, solving problems of India in an Indian way. And I am happy to note here that many of our friends from the global south are finding them very useful, and they are emulating it. And in fact, we are trying to make it a two-way thing, because many of our companies have learned things from other global south partners. So we are implementing those things from them into India, in India. And therefore, the cooperation and collaboration which requires to be done is probably in the field of how we can use this technology for our own benefit. Of course, this also gets associated with certain other aspects, like we should collaborate on ensuring issues of our concern, for example, the safety of the technology, the data security and privacy must be respected, and those kind of issues which also need to be addressed. Countries from not only global south but global north also should come together. We should form consensus on that, and that is what we try to do through this summit. I'm sitting next to Professor from who is one of the co-chairs, and the other one is another co-chair of another working group. They have gone through a series of meetings on two of these working groups to build a consensus on finding, I would say, solutions or pathways, next steps for a couple of issues related to those two working group themes. And that is what we feel is the role and responsibility of Global South. Come together, form consensus, and try to build frameworks or guidelines or playbooks which can be used by everybody for scaling up or spreading out solutions useful for the countries of Global South. Thank you.
Thank you for that, sir. Ambassador Harry, sort of building on the theme of co-designing AI in the Global South, the role of the Global South in agenda setting. I know over the last several months as co-chair of one of the working groups at the AI Summit, you've thought very deeply about what economic growth and social good in the context of AI looks like, what its adoption in the Global South could look like. And increasingly, we are seeing South-North-South triangular cooperation models emerging and shaping how AI and digital technologies are really being adopted and governed in the Global South. So from your experience, more broadly in the realm of digital diplomacy, and then more specifically in the last several months, preparing, doing the work at the working group, leading the work at the working group, what principles do you think are most important in designing these partnerships, which are more on an equal footing, and where it's not designed in a beneficiary model, but rather where the Global South are co-designers and agenda setters in building sustainable local AI ecosystems?
Well, thank you very much for this introduction. Surely, being the co-chair of one of the working groups preparing for this summit has been a very interesting journey, working with India and with Indonesia in my case, to develop the principles that and the outcomes and the deliverables that we've worked on in the past few months. It was truly what I would call co-designing, and I hope we will, in the follow-up, also be co-implementing. I just wanted to also mention that I was very much struck by some of the remarks that on the previous seminar was made with regard to the concept of Global South. And of course, it's an easy frame and an easy way to distinguish one from the other. But I personally feel that in the context of AI, the Global South and the Global North, in terms of it doesn't really exist.
Welcome to the club.
because I feel that the designing and of AI concepts in the hands of a very few, and basically go and shake each other's hands. No one in the global north, apart from a few, are actually designing, and surely most of us are not part of that in the true sense of the word. So I feel that what was mentioned, I think by Madam Malvika, was really very pertinent, and I think it's something to further ponder upon as we move on throughout the week. The Netherlands, with all its advanced technologies and economy, we are not in the designing phase ourselves either. So how do we proceed? And I think we, responding to your question, are basically three concepts that I feel are interesting in terms of design. This is the co-governance from day one, I would call it. The other one is human rights by design as a technical requirement. And finally, building local AI ecosystems and not isolated pilots. And I will say a few words on each of these concepts. So, let's say, if I say Global South partners, I will see, let's say, many partners beyond the Global South. We should be agenda setters, and in doing so, without just being implementers, we should cooperate, and we should find each other's common ground and shake each other's hands and hold each other's hands, I believe. It's shared decision-making structures and jointly defined success metrics. Foreign policy of all countries, including my own, should be values-driven and explicitly take into account the impact on all of us, grounded in democracy, the rule of law, and human rights, very often overlooked. My second point, human rights by design, is a technical requirement. I think the Netherlands has, from experience, learned that human rights should not be treated as an ethical add-on to and after deployment of the development. Instead, human rights consideration must be mainstreamed from the very start. At the international level, our approach promotes normative frameworks that align AI with human rights, democratic values, and the rule of law, as demonstrated by the leading role we took on behalf of the EU in the negotiations leading to the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of the AI, which was globally adopted in 2020. Following from that, we're proud to have been the first European country to publish a readiness assessment. Early last year we did so, and setting out how our national policies align with and operationalize these recommendations. We've carried this commitment forward, including through instruments such as the Council of Europe AI Convention. But agreeing on normative framework isn't the end of the story, it's really just the beginning. And whatever frameworks are agreed must be accessible and comprehensible for everyone involved in digital transformation. Implementing an AI system requires multidisciplinary expertise from a variety of perspectives, such as engineering, policy, legal, and procurement. And to ensure each of these disciplines understands their role, we've developed a comprehensive algorithm framework for our public sector to bridge the language gap between the disciplines. And this framework sets out, for each of the different roles involved in implementing AI, the requirements which apply to the systems they wish to implement, whether those derive from copyright law, civil service law, human rights instrument, procurement regulations, or technical standards. And we've made it an open source living resource hosted on GitHub to eliminate barriers to access, especially for the technical developers involved. And this framework, alongside our public algorithm register and human rights impact assessments, represents a cohesive approach to operationalize our values. So finally, on building local AI ecosystem and not isolated pilots. Sustainable AI ecosystems require access to talent, data governance, and open standards. And the Dutch approach focuses on ecosystem thinking, digital autonomy, open standards, and security by design. And applying that internationally means investing in local capacity to develop, govern, and maintain AI systems, not just deploying solutions designed elsewhere. So we're now working on our international AI strategy, and I can tell you, working that strategy out has been quite a challenge in itself. So how do you write this down, and how do you actually operationalize an international strategy for a government like the Netherlands to work on AI on the international level? So we're still working on that, but a few major elements are part of that. One is partnership, and as I said earlier, it's partnership throughout the world. So it's coping with challenges that we share, but also make use of the opportunities that arise. And finally, I would say, so working on developing regulatory frameworks, as well as working on innovation, this goes hand in hand. This is not a frame that we should accept that, it's either you have an open development of AI and boost your economy, or you're just very fine regulators and you don't bother about innovation. This is not how it works. It goes hand in hand. So these are our principles that we work on. I hope this responds to your question.
Thank you so much. Sort of picking up on the aspect of building local AI ecosystems that you were referencing. Seydina, I know you've played a key role in supporting Senegal's Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation in really steering the digital transformation of higher education systems, including really coordinating the acquisition of Senegal's national supercomputer. So if you sort of step back and draw on this experience, what advice would you have for Global South countries around how they should approach the global AI ecosystem, how they should think about building their local AI ecosystems, whether it's across compute, talent, research institutions, governance, so that we really ensure that AI development is locally grounded and sustainable over the long term?
Thank you for the question. I will respond very simply. In the context that you have the global north of AI, which is US and China, and the global south is the rest of the world of AI, of course. You have the majority of countries talking about sovereignty, but sovereignty is not about isolation, it's about cooperation to attain the sovereignty and to be part of the global effort or the global governance of AI. And to be part of the global effort, it's like the Canadian Prime Minister said, if you're not you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So we should be at the table, and to be at the table, we should be prepared to be at the table, to have a meaningful voice, and to contribute in an equal manner. Because I don't like the word inclusion, because inclusion is like you're not part of it, and we call you inside it. We are part of it, and if we want to be heard, we have to be prepared. And it was the sense of our work in the UN high-level advisory body to build a global governance of AI where everyone is equally involved. And one of the recommendation we had at the high-level advisory body was to have two institutions. One is a scientific panel. Now we have it. Ravi is one of the members. Congrats. And in this scientific panel, it's important to know that we have about 16 people from what we call the Global South. And out of them, we have 8 coming from Africa. It's very interesting because we could have a meaningful voice coming from Africa in the scientific discussion about AI. And I know a lot of them, and I'm sure that we will have a meaningful voice inside this scientific panel. And the other is a policy dialogue. We'll have the first session in July, and to be prepared, we have to have some capacity building or reinforce capacity of our policymakers, our diplomats also, because they will be at the table. And for that, we are having a work we are doing with Ravi and others to make concrete one of the recommendations we had in the high-level advisory body is to build a global network of capacity building centers. On AI capacity building centers. The first meeting we did it in IIT Madras, Ravi hosted it, and the second one we did it in Senegal, I hosted it. And we have around 14 countries which are involved in this process. And I think that it's a great opportunity to build local ecosystem, because one of the principles of this network is to work in multi-countries complex problems on AI. So multi-country complex problem is that we are not doing just simple use cases or doing AI for doing AI, but we are building local ecosystem. Because when you have complex multi-country problem, you will tackle the problem of talent, you will tackle the problem of infrastructure and so on, and you will also tackle the problem of research. And it is the midterm, and I think that in the long term also we should have research on foundational AI, because I'm sure that we can do AI more responsibly. And I think that giving a new way of doing things could be a great thing for the humanity, because actually we are doing our way to do AI is not so responsible. You know. Yeah. Thank you.
If we talk about local ecosystems, Anita, and we talk about public interest AI, there's another part to local AI ecosystems, right? Global South is often contributing the data, we're contributing the digital labor, while, in the conversation we've been having so far, the value is accruing to a concentrated few. So if you step back and think about your decades of work around questions of data ownership, these are not new questions. Collective rights or public value. What do you think are some of the governance mechanisms we need to seed now to ensure that we shift Global South countries from peripheral roles to positions of real ownership and control in the AI value chain? So we don't repeat the cycles and the challenges that we've seen in the past.
So a manifesto of democratic declaration to emancipation. We don't have the answers, but I'm so thankful to be here and amidst this group. And the first panel really sent my mind into a buzz. And I just wanted to respond to Malvika's provocation about the Global South being a positionality. I do agree with you, it is. And as societies are getting increasingly racialized and polarized, postmodern history will have it that we really need to think of the Global South as a positionality. And yet, Global South is also a place. It's a place because of colony, and colony is modern history, and you cannot overwrite history. So in some sense, I think the geoeconomics and geopolitics, that frame the AI debate have to be looked at in a historical continuity. And the stories that we heard in the first panel, what are we up against in the global south? Yes. There was the war against HIV drugs, which was actually a war against pharma enclosures, rules under TRIPS, exemptions that developing countries wanted. We were up against infrastructure projects that left people out because of structural adjustment programs in continents like Africa, imposed on them through the Bretton Woods institutions. And we said not just no to rehabilitation, but we said no to large projects because they annihilate ecological systems. And now, we're up against harms in AI. Well, one way to look at it is that harms are externalities, but like Urvashi Aneja said yesterday in another group, harms are also constitutive, they're internal to us. But I'm going to probably make a formulation, and I dare say, algorithmic harm today is a factor of production, in Marxist terms. Hate is not a bug, but a feature. This is what techies tell us. And so I think that those who control this malicious knowledge capital, we really need to bring them to account. And this kind of deployment of algorithmic harm as a factor of production is really about systemic harm. And we do need to look as Global South alliances, which really have very, very progressive forces, not only civil society, but also nation states, who can stand up for the binding treaty on transnational corporations and extraterritorial obligations of states and transnational corporations. So I think this is one part of what I wanted to really say, but I want to move from the morals of all of this to the materialities of AI value chains, to Jalak's question. I think we're all aware of the reality today. The Global South is at a moment in a very disadvantageous position in global AI value chains, experiencing a new form of colonization. The data commons has become a free-for-all resource that dominant firms, we know the story. I don't really have to complete the sentence, but this is part of AI enclosures. This is, of course, the common sense, and it has somewhat acquired the halo of mythology. And all of us in the room agree that the story is epic, but we only differ in what needs to be done. And this is where we need to draw lines and figure out who's with us and who's not. The stats are telling. In AI research, patents and deep tech skills, other than China and India, developing countries are completely falling behind. And even China, despite all the distance it has traveled, is caught in a dependent relationship with the US as far as compute is concerned. So what are the core governance mechanisms that are urgently needed to address the state of affairs? So my organization is part of the working group on data governance at the UNCSTD, and we've actually seen the theater of negotiations, the kind of ways by which discussions are stalled, the ways by which international negotiations really take place, right, with lines of defense unfold in a manner that is really not at all looking like there will be space that will be ceded at all. But we fight the good fight, and in terms of an effective governance framework that addresses data extractivism, one of the important reports that came out of the HLAB on AI is the proposal in 2024 about a global AI training data framework. This is a very valuable report, but I think we really need to go further in pushing the boundaries of ethics, of distributive and democratic integrity in the world around data. So the first thing is, of course, about data-related definitions and principles for global governance of training data sets. But we also need to understand that we need pluralistic approaches to data ethics and data governance. So there is a certain sensibility that different countries bring, for instance, to the social relational aspects of data governance. And this may be very much about collective data rights or societal data rights. And this is something that the Non-Personal Data Committee in India had also advocated, as also Brazil in its various jurisprudence. The second thing is that there is a need for transparency and rights-based accountability in the use of cross-border data, which is basically limits to commodification and free and prior consent mechanisms that's not just for collection of personal data, but also use of non-personal data, like GIS mapping of lands, islands in the Pacific. So even non-personal data requires let's say non-human origin personal data. This is also very, very important in the global context. The third is the accessibility, the non-discriminatory accessibility of data for people, which is basically, do I have the right to ask and be heard on the principles on which the right to information movement in India was built, right? It was a bottom-up movement. It was really not a top-down entitlement, but a bottom-up right, where poor people who were non-literate, stood up and said, I need to know public information, right? So the history of that movement teaches us that flourishing and accountable local ecosystems need local access to public data. And of course, this is a very big question. When data is already in enclosures, how do local public authorities, how do local people price open this enclosure? And an important area for future action, which ought to have been yesterday, but of course we will act tomorrow, is about intellectual property regimes that are weaponized in the first place as trade secrets in order to enclose data, taking data out of public law frameworks into private contracts, and down the value chain, the use of patents, preemptive patents, aggressive patents, to patent what? I mean, very, very simple things in statistical solutions, which then prevent, developing countries from having a share in the pie. Of course, the point here is not about one-time benefit sharing for source communities. We are not talking about largesse or handouts. We are talking about being a legitimate part of the innovation. My colleague was talking about not wanting to be included. That sounds a little bit cringy. We really need to be part of innovation futures in a very legitimate way. And so the ability to copy, share, study, and create derivatives of AI systems, all of this hinges very much on the future of intellectual property. And I think this depends on all components, the way in which intellectual property is applied to data, to model weights, to parameters, to algorithms and code. So we really need to look very, very carefully at this, and I think the leadership of countries in the BRICS, in the G77 would be very, very important in this regard. At the same time, there's a very big caution here. Everything is not about data governance. It is, of course, about the peripheralization of all of us in the global south in the value chain in many, many ways, including questions of labor. So this is what the UN Secretary General calls, and it's a little bit unpronounceable, but I will try, the minimum floor for irreducible AI capacities, the minimum floor for irreducible AI capacities, which we need in the global south, which is about investments in public compute, the publicness of compute, and what would that really mean in decentralized terms, right? And so I read a journalist who recently said, imagine Angola and Nigeria co-investing in solar-powered data centers that train models on African health records guarded by local privacy laws. Data stays, value flows. Imagine. So we need contextual models, and rather than focusing primarily on frontier foundational models alone, maybe we need contextual systems, which may be an urgent priority. Of course, skills is a complex question. It's hard to touch that and not really get into some profound thesis. But I think governments have to really think about skills not as individual capacities that inhere in people. Skills are essentially societal. Skills are about building competencies that are complementary in society. So skills is a very, very profoundly societal idea. So as we focus on digital entrepreneurship, skills, infrastructure, finance, and data, we will build those ecosystems. But I have a final word or two, which is, all of this is not about digital policies. It's about economic, social, and environmental policies and how they're all aligned for intergenerational accountabilities. And it's extremely important to remember that social care is at the forefront of everything. Feminist social care is at the forefront of everything because we are already into a society of precarity. And precarity and care are two sides of the same coin. And at the risk of sounding circular, I want to go back to my first point about what might need very careful thinking. This is about accountable innovation, contextual innovation, AI minimalism, and maybe data decommodification. And all of this perhaps will lead us to a path from Gen AI to regenerative AI, Regen AI. Thank you very much.
A lot of food for thought, Anita, on how we're defining local ecosystems, what we need to sort of embed into conversations around local ecosystems, what data governance looks like. If we can switch gears and really think about what does national regulation and the role of safety in global processes starting to shape up and look like, and the role that the Global South can play in defining the direction for these. Olivier, scaling AI in public systems requires a lot of public trust, as much as technical readiness. In your experience, what mechanisms, either regulatory, institutional, voluntary, community-driven, are the most important in the long term, in the medium term, in the short term, to ensure that scaled AI systems remain accountable and inclusive?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Sorry for being late a bit. It was due to traffic. I think that we need AI in traffic management in the city. So I came from another session and got stuck in traffic not far from here. But
we're so glad that you could join us.
That's good.
The AI here is the aspirational Indian who is causing the traffic.
It is? Okay, that's good. There is a great opportunity into this. So jumping right into the question, being the director of Rwanda AI Scaling Hub in Rwanda, I want to speak from experience. I come from Rwanda, Global South, small country in terms of size. Population of Rwanda, 14 million, is probably maybe half the city of Delhi in terms of people. But where the country have been undertaking a journey of digital transformation across not more than 20 years right now, really waking up from the ashes of the bad experience into where we are right now. There's been tremendous change. When it comes to the AI journey, actually it's something that the country started about 5-6 years ago in different ways, and now things are starting to be more visible of where can it be seen. Drawing to the question of the best way of scaling AI in public systems and what are the mechanisms or what should be prioritized. Actually, the approach of Rwanda have been to take the three at the same time instead of thinking that we're going to do one and then do another. Basically, one, we say we need to move fast. We know we don't have a lot of resources, but the willingness is there. So the choice became to really taking the AI journey as a way of building, I would say building the plane while you fly it at the same time. So that translates into, on the three mechanisms, basically, priority went to regulatory mechanism, where the principle is we need to build trust by design. The other part now goes to institutional governance mechanism that also needs to be going at the same time. Then, as another third pillar is the community-facing accountability. Now, going into the details of each one of them, regulatory by design, the underlying principle here is that public trusts have to begin with clear, enforceable rules that before the scale can happen. So if we are talking about any solution, any use case that we made to undertake, what's the governing law behind it? What's the purpose? So this needs to be defined first. Who is going to be the custodian, both of the solution, of the data that translate into there, and somehow the custodian of the failures and successes of the solutions. So all this is basically embedded into the policy and into the regulation to make it happen. The other part comes now to the institutional mechanism. The AI scaling hub that we are putting in place right now, it's starting with 3 key sectors to focus on. That is health, agriculture, and education. And you can understand that the thinking is anything that we need to do, we need to be healthy. Let me call it, not to say alive, because we need to be alive, but we need to be healthy. And if we have to be healthy, we need to eat. And in order to do all this, education is key. So where there is really opportunity into using AI in healthcare, sometime to speed up, to bring the efficiency into the processes, but always make sure that there is a human behind it who make the educated decision, not the machine. The machine is more to facilitate the process. Talking about agriculture is mostly to start with the advisory services, which we have started. The farmers, what do they need in order to be more efficient? How do they get products or their produce on the market? We had situations where you can have a lack of some type of produce in one region when it's being very abundant in another way, but the logistic not being coordinated becomes an issue. So AI, this is an opportunity where we are actually putting the first pilot in place to make it happen. Same thing for education. We go through national exams, and it's a tedious times for the education sector to take 2 months, which is between July and September, to pass national exam to all stages, and then send the kids to school in September within 2 months with all the insight and all the ways that it needs to be presented. So there is an opportunity where AI can be used to actually spend less time on assessment and allow more time to teachers to spend doing what they should be doing, which is teaching. so that's this is also in place. Then the other part comes to the community-facing mechanism. The idea here is legitimacy needs to be really at the citizen level. And you need to build, and this has been the approach, transparency is the key. The idea in Rwanda is like the transparency builds legitimacy, but opacity brings suspicion. So if you need this to be adopted, any solution in AI to be adopted, we need to acknowledge that it's first not a technological challenge, but more of a public interface architecture challenge. People look at AI, for me as a person who has been in the technology sector, I'm like, oh, the AI age or the natural language model have now put the machine to do what a machine should be doing. And me, the human, I do the thinking. So this is the way I look at it because of, I would say, my background. I've been used to instruct machine what to do in coding, and they just did the execution, but I couldn't talk to them in my natural language. Now, the natural language model brings that aspect where I don't need to do coding anymore. I can tell the machine, if I can think it, then the machine can do it. But for the regular and more citizen, getting to that stage, looking into the society where we come from, where people believe in God, people believe in existence of Satan, it's like sometimes it's like, is this real? So how we are working on educating the people to get to understand that the best way, basically, you can trust, but they trust more if it's something they can use. If we can deliver a solution that they are able to use with their MIGO means. When I say MIGO means, connectivity in Rwanda, broadband connection is available everywhere, but not everyone have access to a smartphone. So one, if we provide solution that they can speak to in their natural language, which is Kinyarwanda, it's already one way of getting that trust. Two, can they use it with the means they have, which is really starting right from the beginning and see the improvement and see the value to even invest more. So that have been the approach, and this sums up a bit of the approach the country that have been taking. And so far, we have implemented a number of pilots. If I have time, we can talk about it. And we are really looking at scaling and start seeing, we say, result and impact at scale. That's it. Thank you.
Ravi, Global South countries, are feeling the pressure not to be left behind. They're trying to quickly scale products in the AI space. At the same time, there are a lot of AI applications being developed in the Global North that are then being deployed in the South without necessary contextual sort of evaluations on systems. In the race towards innovation, I know you're deeply thinking about AI safety. You've served on a number of committees and panels. I know you live and breathe it. In your new role on the UN AI Scientific Panel, you're going to think about it some more. So what would you leave this audience with as we close out this panel in terms of what they should be thinking about as we talk about AI safety from a Global South perspective?
Sure. So, is that right?
you can
okay,
take
fine.
a bit of more.
No, it's just showing me that I have 2 minutes left, so I just wanted to make sure that that's not... Okay. So in the first place, I'm happy that we are talking about AI governance, right? Not only about AI regulation or AI safety, because I believe that governance is a lot more than talking about regulating AI. And in fact, in some sense, the Global South, we can aspire to be on the same platform. But in fact, like the ambassador rightfully mentioned, right? So there are literally 2 countries, probably 4 companies in 1 country that are in the global north of AI, right? Not even the countries themselves, right? So we have to really think about how AI is going to affect us, and that comes from both the application point of view. So in fact, if you look at the governance guidelines for India, so we actually have emphasized that you should first talk about how will AI align with existing regulatory infrastructure that's already there in the country, right? And in what ways will these be challenged with adoption of AI? So we talked about various sectors. I mean, Olivia talked about a few sectors, and there are a few well-regulated sectors like banking and health and even education to some extent, right? These have regulatory bodies, and so how would AI challenge these regulations? So that's something that we have to really think about. And in fact, very recently, I got to see an excerpt from a speech given by the governor of Pennsylvania in the Congress. And he was talking about how there are apps on the Play Store, completely AI-driven apps on the Play Store that claim that they are licensed to practice medicine in Pennsylvania. So this is like unbelievable, right? So I mean, you can put in whatever regulatory structure you want, but unless we are going to enforce them very, very diligently, right? And so it has to be, I mean, that's disturbing. We have to be very, very careful about how we are going to do this enforcement. Otherwise, having all these regulatory structure, the laws on paper, and which people who are in India, and pretty sure this is true in many geographies. Many laws remain on paper, right? So they don't get enforced. And I think in this case, we shouldn't allow people to say that, oh, but I didn't do it, the AI did it, as a pass for any kind of liabilities that get attached to a human who would have made that decision, right? Just because AI makes a decision doesn't give them a pass. It has to figure out how do you get back to the root cause of it. And I think that the AWS person already mentioned that in the previous panel. They're really looking not to pass on the blame, but they're really looking at which section of AWS to blame. So, so that's something to think about, right? And so, having said that, so let's talk about a few more things that we have been looking at that are, don't quite align with the global quote-unquote safety dialogue, right? So, for example, so you could come up with various regulatory principles that say that, okay, AI should be fair, right? So you have to make sure that there are no unfair representation of any groups through this through AI models, and making sure that services are equally accessible to people and so on and so forth. But in a country like India or other countries in the global south, right, what exactly constitutes unfairness is not even recorded explicitly. I mean, you know it when you see it, but you don't have a formal mechanism by which you can say that, hey, this is a database that you have to take into account when you are designing your AI system to ensure that when evaluated against this data, your system is fair. Right? So there are technical issues that we have to address before we start talking about, I can come up with regulations. I can say that, okay, AI should be fair. In fact, we have those lines in our governance guidelines, right? So we're saying that, okay, so we have to make sure fairness, equity, inclusion, everything. I mean, so inclusion in this case is not a bad word, but inclusion and everything, but we don't really know what we are looking at. So, for example, we talk about facial recognition technology. Yesterday I was talking at a panel where we were actually discussing the fact that we don't know how accurate facial recognition technology is for different Indian face types. Right, so we know that about how it looks at population types that are prevalent in the West, right? So, but we don't know. I'm pretty sure the same holds for Africa. I don't think there is enough classification of how different facial types score on facial recognition systems, right? So we don't have that. So without that, first of all, talking about adoption of these, whether it is being done locally or whether the AI is being built elsewhere, it's a challenge. Right, and I know you didn't ask me about it. Can I make one more point? Yeah, since we are ignoring that anyway. So we are just eating into the drinks, like whatever, the coffee break. So we're not eating into the next session. So we are not depriving you of any further intellectual satisfaction. So it's just your. So let's keep going for a couple of more minutes, right? So one of the things that I really want to think about, right? So when we are talking about a lot of the dialogue about AI safety, right? It always talks about, existential risks. Should we be pushing the frontier models capacity so much and so on and so forth? Yes, of course, it matters to the entire world if the human race is going to go extinct. But what is it that the global south can do about it, frankly? Right? At this point, I would say that we expect, really, because it's the same thing to do, is not to cause the extinction of the human race. So let's not worry about regulating for that. Let's not worry about governing for that. We really have to look at what is it that we can get out of AI systems, and where does, for example, development of AI systems affecting us, right? So really, in some sense, if you think about it, just as manufacturing shifted, highly polluting jobs to the south, right from the north. So what we are getting is, the more mentally disturbing, mentally polluting jobs, like data labeling, looking at harmful content and things like that, getting pushed to the global south. And increasingly, people are talking about setting up data centers in the global south because they figured out they need power, and a lot of power generation is polluting. So push them off to the global south. I don't think we should get into a point where we become the similar kind of a situation where we take up the more quote-unquote polluting parts of the AI value chain, AI supply chain, but not move up the AI value chain. So that's something that, again, we have to think about when we start talking about AI. So I'll stop here.
We've heard diverse perspectives today from the political economy of AI to questions of governance, international agenda setting. We've heard perspectives from India, Africa, Europe, and we've heard about where we are today and where we need to go. The rest of the day is really us breaking out into separate 4 tracks on contextualizing AI, safe and trusted AI, governance of AI, to take apart many of the conversations we've had over the last few hours and talk about and chart concrete pathways forward.